Ever spent hours on an embroidery design only to have it shift, end up full of gaps, or turn into a tangled mess of threads? You're not alone. These common mistakes are ruining your projects, and most people don't even realize they're making them. Watch until the end of the video to learn exactly how to fix them. The first and most common mistake that you'll see, especially on single needle machines, are the jumps and trims. That's where you see all of the threads tangled together and it almost looks like a spider web as opposed to a clean and neat design. And the reason this happens on your designs is because your connections on your designs aren't optimized for best digitizing results. Let's take a look at the spaceship right here on the left, and as you can see, there are quite a lot of trims. Each one of these scissors that you see around this design equals to a trim or a jump, which means that the design will raise the needle, go to the other place, and drop down elsewhere. This design, unfortunately, because of the way that it was digitized, is full of jumps, and not only did it take longer for the machine to embroider it, but it also requires manual cleanup after you're done the embroidery. As you can see, when I compare it to the spaceship on the right, there's way less trims, which means that there are also way less jumps because of the way that I've set up connections. Now, this is the Embroidery Legacy software, and it has some very neat tools that help you assist with all of those issues. So for example, if you see up here, it has something called Smart Join, Auto Trim, and Auto Lock. These are settings that traditional digitizers had to do manually to get the best results. But for example, right here, I'm just going to quickly create something utilizing my widget tool, Classic Satin, which is again a traditional digitizing tool, and I'm going to select and ensure that I have Smart Join, Auto Trim, and Auto Lock. If I were to create a shape somewhere around here and I just decide to curve it, I'm going to press enter. You can see that for this design, the start is set up here and the stop is set up on the opposite end. Well, because I have Smart Join, I no longer have to change that stop. Instead, all I have to do is create my next shape and the program will automatically change the start and stop. So again, let me just select this one right here, and you see that it changed from start at the bottom here to the stop, and then the start and the stop. In traditional digitizing, the way you used to have to do this, and this is why a lot of beginners end up having issues like this design over here. Now I'm going to disable the Smart Join so you can see what happens when I create the exact same shape but without that feature now available. So I'm going to create the same kind of curve that goes like this, and I'm pressing enter. Now when I click on it, you can see that it has a start and it has a stop. Now let's create the next shape. So I'm going to click here on my widget tool to select my Classic Satin once again, and I'm going to create exactly that same shape. But you can see there's an issue now. There are two trims instead of one. So there's one trim right here and there's another one right here. And if I go back to the details of this shape, here's the start, here's the stop, and it no longer switched to over here. Now I did it manually, which means that that's how you solve the problem. So if we want to solve that issue on this spaceship right here, we'd have to go in and find each shape and just ensure that the start, which is the green, and the stop, which is the red, connect to each other from the previous and the next shape as close as they can. Now, this is honestly why I love Smart Join so much. It is my favorite feature in this program, is because it has simplified digitizing so much. You no longer really have to think about your starts and stops anymore because it takes care of all of that. If you see that your design has a lot of jumps as well as a lot of trims, it's simply because the connections on your design are not set properly. So it causes the design to stop, jump to the next shape, and then finish that, as opposed to having the best connections from beginning to end of that shape. Now we do have a free digitizing cheat sheet available that will be linked down in the description, as well as the link to this software. So if you guys want to go check that out, we do go a little bit more in depth in how this works, as well as how you want to digitize your files. So make sure to check that out after this video. But let's move on to the next common issue. Now this issue is something I see a lot of beginners make, and that is the empty spaces. There are a lot of questions, a lot of posts about, hey, my embroidery has some empty spaces. I don't understand why there are so many gaps on my design, and that comes down to a few different settings. The main one being push and pull compensation. So taking a look at this embroidery design, I can see that this shape right here has a gap, and that's because it lacks a couple things. So let's take a look at it. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit and just disable the 3D. Now again, we do have the ability on the software to have recipes, and you usually start out with a canvas recipe, but we have many recipes that you can choose from. So this saves you the time from having to always set up your own recipe. Instead, we have professional preset recipes ready to go to save you that extra time from having to always set them up yourself. But for now, I'm just going to leave it as blank as it already is, and we're gonna go into the properties. As you can see, it also has no underlays, but that's something we'll talk about in a little bit. So I'm gonna go to pull compensation. Currently it's in absolute, but it has no pull compensation. So if I were to add just a little bit more pull compensation, you can see that the shape is now growing, but it's growing for very specific reasons. And that is because in embroidery, remember, we're working on a 3D space, we're working with real life materials. Each stitch point that you create causes some tension because of the machine utilizing the top thread and the bobbin, which ends up causing those gaps, which is why you need pull compensation. Now, push and pull compensation fall under the digitizing theory, and it's something that is really important to know if you want to avoid those gaps. Thankfully, we do offer education alongside the program, so this is a topic to practice on and understand to get your best digitizing results. Pull compensation also depends a lot on the fabrics that you're utilizing. Some may need more, some may need less, depending on the stretch. It really does fall under the theory base, but if you see that you have a lot of gaps on your design, it might just be because you need a little bit more pull and push compensation on your design. Now, the reason I'm not being super detailed on push and pull compensation is because it does require theory knowledge, which we do provide alongside included the software. So if you want to learn all of these in-depth examples, those will be available to you in the link in the description for this software. Let's move on to the next common example. This is a fun one, and this is something I see all the time, and that is misalignment on your designs. Now, this definitely has to do with push and pull compensation. So not only will you get gaps, but you will also see that your threads are misaligned. Some of your outlines will be all over the place, and you're telling yourself like, why does this look so bad? Why is my thread shifting when it shouldn't have? Now, this has to do a little bit with underlays. So for example, if I am to zoom in on this design, you can see this design right here has no underlays at all. Versus if I were to go to this other one and I look here, this is full of underlays. I've used a recipe available for me, which in this case is cotton that you can see right here. And before I started digitizing this design, that recipe was already in place to help me preset the settings that I needed for the design. Now, if you don't know what underlays are, they are like the base of a house, or is what makes the design stable. So if you ever see a design that is shifting all over the place, it's because it doesn't have enough stability from the stabilizer, but as well, it requires an underlay, a base in which the threads can hold themselves. Especially on bigger shapes, you may need more underlays, whereas if you have a smaller shape, you can get away without using so many of them. Now, in the software, it's very simple to set up your own underlay. All you have to do is click on the shape that you want, and we're gonna go under properties, and here we have the different underlays. Some are perpendicular, some are parallel, some are contour, we have zigzag, as well as center run, and each one of them serves their purpose. So depending on the kind of result that you want, you will use different settings. Now, underlays isn't the only reason why your design may come out misaligned. Another reason is because of the design order. So if I were to look at this spaceship right here and I were to click play, I can see that the way in which the design was created isn't necessarily the best. The stitches are jumping all over the place. As I said, there is no underlay, so there are no bases for the shapes to really latch onto and hold on to have a really good result. And the order in which the stitches were created aren't necessarily optimal. Now let's take a look at the other spaceship. Now I'm gonna press play on this one, and you can see that the order is already very different. If I go back a little bit, you can see those are the underlays. So I'm creating a base for that shape to go on top of it, or you can call it the tatami or fill, so that the shape will hold and it won't be shifting anywhere. I'm also arranging the order of the design. So I've decided, hey, I'm going to digitize the whole bottom part, ensure that I finish that whole shape before I move on to the rest of the design. Same thing here. I told myself, what can I create? And I thought, hey, let's make sure that I go shape by shape so I can create this whole blue, again with its underlays and then the purple. As I go along, you can see we're going back to talking about connections. So right here, instead of trimming, so you can see that on other designs, you would trim where the design stops stitching, it trims, and then it moves on to the next shape. I decided to add a very quick connection right here so that the machine doesn't have to trim, it doesn't waste time, and it keeps going to the next shape. I've strategically made this design and the order in which I'm showing you so that I have the best alignment possible on the fabric that I stitch it out on. And again, while digitizing this design, I'm trying my best to connect as much as possible to avoid any unnecessary trims or jumps that just cause the design to take longer to embroider or have potential issues. So that whenever you're seeing a project that is heavily misaligned, it may just be because of the order. You might be trying to save some thread changes, especially if you have a single needle, but it's very important to have an order to your design so that you have the best alignment for the nicest results. And yes, we also do cover all of this in the lessons, but let's talk about the next one for now. And this is the one thing that a lot of you struggle with, and that is thread breaks. That is when your embroidery machine is stitching something out and out of nowhere the thread breaks or the needle breaks or the thread comes out of your needle. Now it's because of a couple of reasons in your design that we've already covered, but it could also be because of your tension on your embroidery machine as well as improper use of underlay. That's why we've created the How to Embroider Almost Anything series, so you guys can see what stabilizer you will need for each fabric. So if you haven't checked those out, make sure you do to see the best tips and tricks on how to embroider for those specific fabrics. Now going back to digitizing, thread breaks happens for a couple of reasons. We already talked about underlays, we already talked about misalignment, but the most common thing that happens with thread breaks is when too many stitches are bunched on top of each other. So for example, I'm not even going to use the spaceship here. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to create a box. Let me just go to my artwork tool and I can just select a square. I'm going to put a square down. So let's do this right here. I'm just going to do a square, make a square really quick. Perfect. Now this square should technically embroider perfectly. There should be no thread breaks, and the reason why is because if we go to our properties, we have a density of 0.4. Now that's usually the standard density for a fill, which means that the threads are side by side covering the shape. Now because we do have a recipe on this design, it also has underlays, parallel contour, which will help this design stitch out perfectly without there being any shifting on it. A big mistake that people make when creating their designs is that not only do they use another 0.40 density, which means that threads are side by side, but they also leave the underlays. So let me show you an example. I'm just duplicating this shape right here. So I'm going to change this to purple. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to place this other stitch on top of it. Now I am going to show you stitch points, and look at how many points each dot is a stitch going in. So the needle is going up and down into your fabric. And at this point, the reason why your thread or needle may break is because that same needle is going up and down on that same piece of fabric that it already passed by. So this is way too dense, has a higher chance of breaking, and is also something called a bulletproof design. You could use this as a shield from how thick it'll be if it does finish embroidering. Now again, I sound like a broken record, but all of this does fall under theory, and our goal with this program was to create it as simple, as easy to understand as possible. We give you all of the tools so that you can create really fast digitizing, but without the knowledge on how to utilize these tools, you're just as lost, which is why we are also including all of the education with the software. So you'll know how to fix those thread breaks, you'll know how to connect your designs properly, how to use underlays, and etc. We have one more topic to talk about before you go check out that cheat sheet. Now I'm going to pull up an example here so you can see what puckering looks like. And that is normally when a design is going all over the place, or the settings on that design are just not the proper settings for that fabric. Again, that's why the recipes are so awesome on this program, is because let's say for example, especially shirts that are so stretchy, if you were to put a super dense design on that shirt, that's where you get the puckering. And it may not look so bad when you first get it on that shirt, but as soon as you wash that shirt and you take it out of the washer, then you'll start to notice those creases. You'll start to notice it warp and bend, almost looking like a wave, and it just doesn't really look nice. Now, the simplest way to fix puckering is by reducing the density on the design. So let's say for example, this shape right here, it is currently at 0.3 millimeters and it's puckering a lot. It's grabbing onto that fabric, it's pulling it, and it just looks ugly. If I were to then change my density to 0.5, 0.6, it's giving each stitch point a little bit of a breather, a little bit more space, so it can lay flat and lay nicely on the fabric itself. Another reason why your design may be puckering is because your stitches are just going all over the place, especially your bases. So if I were to look at this design in 3D, you can see that these are going this way and this is going that way, and the angles and inclinations are just kind of going all over the place. Remember, I set no underlays on this design, so it's just kind of like floating around in space. It is a spaceship after all, but we still want it to look nice. And that, compared to this other design right here, I've decided to set this up as a fill. Now, a fill goes one way, and I wanted it to go at a 45-degree angle, and that just allowed the shape to hold out a little bit better. You can see the alignment is heavily improved, and there are no puckers on this design because the density is set right, the underlays were set right, and there isn't shapes that are going crazy all over the place that could potentially cause that on your shirt. Guys, I know it may seem a little bit overwhelming having to hold all of this knowledge, but I promise that we've made the education so easy to understand. We like to take it step by step and help you understand, because not only do we want you guys to have the best digitizing program, but we also want you to have the best education so you can have as much success when you create your designs, have fun digitizing, and enjoy the pleasures that embroidery brings to this craft. So remember, the links to the software as well as the cheat sheet are available right below. If you have any questions, don't forget to comment down. We'll do our best to answer them on the comments or create a special video for you. In the meantime, check out these videos and I'll catch you guys on the next tutorial. Take care, Legacy family. See you on the next one.